I went to a romantic dinner with my wife that Friday night, hoping to rekindle something that had long seemed to fade between us. I had made reservations at the restaurant where we had dined for the first time, years ago, when she was still wearing that blue dress that made me forget the world. I remember how she smiled as she entered the room decorated with yellow lights and the discreet sound of a piano in the background. Everything was perfect. Everything, until he arrived. Her boss. Tall, confident, with that kind of presence that seems to push everyone around him into the background. When he approached our table, I thought it was just out of politeness, perhaps a casual greeting, a comment about work. But no. He didn't come with soft words. He extended his hand to her as if inviting a woman to dance in an old ballroom and, in front of me, said simply, "Come with me, we need to talk." She didn't hesitate. She didn't look at me. She just stood up. I stood there, like an idiot, with my hand still holding the menu and my heart sinking in my stomach. My wife, getting up from our table to sit with another man. In front of me. At the dinner I prepared for her. As if I wasn't there. As if I was invisible. As if I had already ceased to exist. For a few seconds, I thought about pretending it was nothing. About smiling, ordering another bottle of wine, and waiting for her to come back and say it was just work. But I wasn't that kind of man anymore. Not after everything I already knew. I got up from the table with my heart pounding in my ears and walked over to them. She looked uncomfortable, but not guilty. And he looked at me with that air of superiority. That's when I said the only sentence I could manage without shouting, "You decide what's best for you. I'm going to send the divorce letter to your house." She laughed. She thought I was joking. I've always been calm, thoughtful, the kind of man who swallows frogs to keep the peace. But there, in that moment, she didn't see that something in me had died. Something that would never come back. That night, I slept in the car, parked in front of the sea. The sound of the waves did not drown out what was echoing inside me. The questions came like razors. When did she start hiding things from me? What was there between her and that man? Was there love? Or just desire? And worst of all, when did I stop being enough? The worst thing about betrayal is not the stolen kiss, the shared bed, the hidden messages. The worst thing is the feeling that the story has been rewritten and you didn't know it. It's discovering that everything you lived, alone, believing it was a chapter of love, was just a page torn from her book. The following week, I sent the divorce papers. No letter, no explanation. It wasn't necessary. I had seen enough. I knew too much. I discovered old messages, dinners planned on days when she said she was too tired to go out. I saw photos of her smiling next to him, wearing the same blue dress from our first dinner, as if the story had been recycled with another protagonist. But I was no longer a supporting character. I decided to move on. I traveled. I changed. I met new people. And for the first time in a long time, I met someone who listened to me with her eyes, who laughed at my bad jokes, who held my hand out of desire and not out of habit. And with her, I began to understand that true love doesn't suffocate, doesn't demand that you beg for attention, doesn't hurt in secret. Months later, she showed up. Disoriented. Regretful. She found me by chance in a park, with my new partner by my side. Her eyes, which had previously ignored me at the restaurant table, now begged me for a word, a gesture, any sign that there was still room for her in my life. She tried to smile, but her smile trembled. She tried to get closer, but hesitated. And when she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper, "Are you happy?" I looked at her for a few seconds, and answered with something that, perhaps, hurt more than any scream, "Yes." More than I have ever been. She stood there, as if the world had stopped spinning. And it was at that moment that I realized, the worst consequence of betrayal is not the separation. It is the belated realization of what was lost. It is seeing the other person rebuilt, happy, whole, while you are still mending the pieces that you yourself destroyed. She tried to justify it. She said it was a phase, that she felt insecure, that she needed attention. That he was not what he seemed, that he made her feel alive. But now she understood that she had been alive all along. And that she only realized it when there was no one left to hold her hand. She begged. She cried. She said she still loved me. But what could I do? Go back? Erase? Rewrite? Some stories, once torn, cannot be glued back together. They can even be kept as a souvenir, but never reread in the same way. And when she asked if there was any chance, if we could at least talk, I smiled, not out of cruelty, but out of liberation. Because I finally understood the value of a love that doesn't need to be begged for. And I answered with a simple, no. A calm, quiet, almost gentle, no. But it weighed more than any slammed door. Today, she lives alone. And me? I got married again. I have a daughter. And every night, when I go to bed, I hear my new wife telling me that she loves me, with a look that says everything she doesn't need to explain. A look that, for years, I searched in vain for in someone else. Sometimes, destiny doesn't need to take revenge. It just has to wait. Because those who cheat can't imagine the day they'll see the betrayed one happier than ever, next to another woman, with a new ring on his finger, and a child in his arms who calls someone else's name, mother. And that's where the story really begins. Because what she did that night at dinner was just the trigger for something much bigger. Something that neither she nor I could have imagined. And when it all came to light, when the full truth was revealed, she finally understood, but it was too late. After all, what she saw that Sunday morning, when she showed up at my door crying, will never leave her mind. And it was exactly there that she realized the price of the choice she made. But what did she see? And what did I say? Welcome to the channel. Here, we do not support, ever, any form of betrayal. The stories you will hear are fictional, but the feelings are real. Our goal is clear, to show how betrayal destroys lives, tears hearts apart and leaves deep scars. Now, take a deep breath. Get ready. You are about to hear a story shocking. Her name was Alisa and his name was Daniel. They had been married for 7 years, but had been living together for over a decade. They met in college, when they were in the same psychology class, although she had dropped out in her 6th semester to pursue what she had always believed to be her calling, public relations. Daniel, on the other hand, followed through, graduated, and eventually specialized in organizational behavior, taking a stable position at a medium-sized company that valued the emotional environment of its employees. They complemented each other in a quiet and confident way, as if one had been born to support the other's weaknesses. Daniel was analytical, methodical, and emotionally restrained, while Alisa was outgoing, charming, and carried a magnetism that made every room a little more lively when she entered. Together, they built a relationship based on calm affection, small gestures, sincere smiles, and a complicity that seemed to stand the test of time. They lived in a 2-bedroom apartment with a balcony overlooking the city's gray and blue skyline, where the wind sewed the curtains together every afternoon. The apartment smelled of fresh coffee, well-tended plants, and travel objects that told pieces of the couple's story: the shell bought in Cartagena, the photo frame from the Palermo market, the lamps bought in a hurry on a Sunday in Lisbon. Life there seemed to flow smoothly. They had a puppy named Sinbad, a calm and loyal mongrel who slept at the foot of the bed and barked for the first time the day Daniel proposed to Alisa. Nothing in their lives was perfect, but everything made sense. They had a stable routine, friends in common, dinners on Saturdays with long conversations, and plans for children that always came up against, maybe next year. And that, for both of them, was enough. Or it seemed to be enough. Alisa had recently started a new position at an events company that worked with high-end brands. It was a big step in her career, a well-deserved recognition after years of working with difficult clients and long hours. Daniel supported her enthusiastically. He got up early to bring her coffee in bed when he knew she had important meetings, and listened to every detail of the projects, even when he didn't quite understand the briefings she explained with fervor. He was proud of the woman she was becoming, independent, confident, growing. He felt good about seeing her blossoming, even if it meant seeing her a little more distant, more tired, more absorbed in responsibilities that now seemed to take over her completely. Still, he didn't complain. He just hoped, as he always had, that it was just a phase. Between them, communication has always been the central axis of their relationship. Daniel, despite being introspective, made an effort to say what he felt. Alisa, although impulsive, listened attentively and liked to play while she spoke, as if her hands could translate what her mouth sometimes could not find. They had their own way of resolving impasses, with patience, even in silence. On bad days, she would leave notes on his desk and he would respond with discreet messages on his cell phone. They did not shout, they did not hurt each other with words, they did not let each other forget. There was, in fact, a mutual respect that sustained them even in the roughest times. And that was what Daniel admired most about her, her ability to look into each other's eyes and say what needed to be said, even when it hurt. In the last few months, however, something subtle had changed. Alisa seemed more distracted. Her eyes wandered more frequently to distant points in the room and her smile took longer to form. It wasn't sadness, Daniel was sure of that, but perhaps tiredness, perhaps a nameless restlessness, the kind that time cultivates without us noticing. She talked less about work, about her colleagues, about the team lunches that she used to share in almost cinematic detail. When Daniel asked her how her day had been, she would answer vaguely, change the subject, or simply smile and say that everything was fine. He understood, of course he understood. But he preferred not to insist. He attributed it to the new professional phase, the increasing demands, the pressure of a new environment. And he said nothing. Because he trusted. Because he preferred to believe that it would pass. Daniel, on the other hand, remained constant. He was predictable in his habits, but also present in his way of loving. He arrived at the same time every day, prepared simple dinners on Wednesdays when Alisa arrived late, and took care of Sinbad with almost paternal affection. His friend said he was the kind of man it was hard to find these days. Sensible, faithful, dedicated. He only smiled. He didn't think he was doing more than his duty. For him, being in a relationship was about commitment, daily choices, and not just about passion. Still, he carried a silent flame inside him, that desire to surprise her, to plan a trip without warning, to take her back to that beach where they kissed for the first time. But he put it off. He always thought it would be better later, when she had more time, when her schedule allowed. Mornings at their house were marked by the sound of the blender and the muffled sound of the shower. Sometimes they would pass each other in the hallway, she with her hair still damp, he adjusting his tie. They exchanged quick kisses, automatic words, but there was affection there. Not the affection of the first months, of course, but the kind that settles, that takes root. They shared silences without discomfort and even shared the same blanket during the early hours of the morning, even though their backs rarely touched. It was a mature love. A love of those who no longer need to prove anything. Or so they thought. The circle of friends remained the same. Dinners with well-known couples, occasional visits to her parents, annual trips to Daniel's sister's house on the coast. Alisa was well-liked among her friends. Everyone recognized her ability to make others feel special, her expansive way of telling stories, her love of laughing out loud without worrying about the volume. Daniel observed this with affection. He was proud to have her by his side. In a way, he felt chosen, privileged. And he was. But the change, albeit slow, continued. Alisa now spent more time away. She said that events were more demanding, that her boss trusted her with delicate tasks, that clients preferred face-to-face meetings. Daniel understood. She deserved to grow. He admired her even more for that. When she arrived late, she would leave dinner warm and wait for the sound of the key turning in the door with the same silent enthusiasm as always. Sometimes she would go upstairs in silence, take a shower and say she needed to go to sleep soon. The next day would be tough. He respected that. He would clear away the dishes, turn off the lights and close the windows as a familiar ritual. On weekends, when there were no work commitments, they would go to the movies, walk in the park or simply stay at home, lying on the couch with Sinbad between them. At those times, Daniel felt that everything was still in place. That her heart still beat for him. That all of this was just a phase of adaptation, a cycle, like so many others that they had overcome together. There were no fights, no crossed words, no hidden screams. There was silence. But a silence that he chose to interpret as breathing, not as distancing. For her birthday, Daniel planned a special dinner. He cooked her favorite recipe, decorated the room with soft lights, and bought a wine they had drunk together on their trip to Tuscany. She smiled when she saw it all, got emotional, thanked him, and hugged him tightly. But during dinner, her gaze seemed far away, as if part of her soul was somewhere else. He noticed, of course. But he didn't comment. Because he loved her. Because he respected her silences. That night, as they lay in bed, he whispered that he loved her more each year. She said she loved him too. And they slept holding hands. Daniel fell asleep believing it. And perhaps she did too. But sometimes, when love is too quiet, you don't hear the exact moment it starts to slip through the corners, unnoticed. And what Daniel didn't know yet was that her eyes had already seen other landscapes. And that, while he tenderly built each wall of their life, she was already looking at doors that he didn't even know existed. But for now, it was still just silence. And the story was just beginning. The rhythm of the days seemed to follow the same silent harmony as always, but the truth is that there was an imperceptible tension floating in the air, dense and sharp, like that feeling that something is about to happen but has not yet taken shape. Daniel had noticed Alisa's more absent-minded looks, the laughter and messages he did not hear, the haste in her steps when leaving for work and the exaggerated tiredness when she returned. But none of that was enough to spark real distrust in Daniel. His heart still believed that everything was part of the process of maturing their careers, that time sometimes distances them and then brings them closer with greater intensity. Alisa, on the other hand, seemed increasingly enveloped in a fog that isolated her. Her mind wandered, her thoughts were elsewhere, her words lost weight and her presence in the home turned into a shadow. It was on a normal Tuesday that the first concrete sign appeared. Daniel arrived home earlier than usual. An unexpected event at work allowed him to leave early. He bought flowers on the way, a gesture he had almost forgotten, but which he decided to bring back without any specific reason, just the simple desire to see a genuine smile on Alisa's face. When he opened the door, the house was silent. The first thing he noticed was her bag on the chair, which meant she was already home. Sinbad was sleeping in the hallway, indifferent. He went to the bedroom, calling her name once, without any response. She was in the bathroom, door ajar, talking on the phone. Daniel approached slowly, with no intention of spying, just curious to know if she was talking to anyone in the family. But what he heard froze his body. Her voice sounded different, softer, filled with a shy laugh that he hadn't heard in a long time. She said something about missing him and can't wait to be together again. Daniel recoiled as if he had been punched. He went back to the living room, left the flowers on the table, sat on the sofa and stared at the wall, as if trying to decipher what he had actually heard. When Alisa came out of the bathroom, she found him there, motionless. He smiled, as if he decided to swallow the pain of not being sure of what he had heard, and asked her if she wanted to go out to dinner. She hesitated, but accepted. From that day on, Daniel began to pay attention to everything. The times, the smells, the gestures, the delays. He began to notice how Alisa spent more and more time on her cell phone, laughing to herself, typing quickly and turning the screen down whenever he approached. The excuses became frequent, last-minute meetings, unplanned events, demanding clients. Daniel didn't question or complain, he just registered each new detail, each sign. He started getting up in the middle of the night to see if she was sleeping or answering messages. He observed her body as she lay down in bed and noticed that she maintained a distance that had never existed before. Even kisses lost their time. They were dry, automatic, like a polite gesture, no longer a reflection of love. Even with all this, Daniel couldn't allow himself to take a definitive action. There was no proof, only feelings. And there was still love. A love in tatters, bleeding silently, but still pulsing. It was like being trapped in a maze where every exit led back to the same place. He didn't want to be unfair, he didn't want to imagine things. He tried to convince himself that maybe she was just tired, maybe she was trying to protect him from something she didn't know how to say. But, inside, doubt gnawed at him. He began to lose his appetite, to sleep badly, to live in a constant state of waiting. He waited for confirmation, for a definitive gesture, for a sign that would free him from that prison without bars. It was on a Friday that the fuse was lit. Alisa left early for a company gala event, saying she would be back late and would stay at the hotel where the party was taking place, since she would be exhausted. Daniel pretended not to find it strange. He said good night, kissed her on the forehead and watched her leave wearing a black dress he had never seen before. As she walked away, he had the impression that this moment was important, as if something was about to break for good. He stayed home, alone, looking at his cell phone, waiting for a message that would not come. And it didn't. The next morning, he woke up early, as he always did. He made coffee, put out some food for Sinbad, and decided to go for a walk. He needed to breathe. As he crossed the square near his apartment, something inside him told him to change his route. He took a taxi. He asked to go to the hotel where Alisa said she would be staying. He didn't know what he would do, he didn't have a plan. He just went. When he arrived, he sat in the lobby, watching the people, the couples, the executives in a hurry, and the waiters with their metal trays. After almost an hour, he saw Alisa getting out of the elevator. She wasn't alone. Beside her, walked an elegant, middle-aged man with a firm gaze and confident steps. Daniel recognized him immediately. It was Alisa's boss. They were both laughing. She fixed her hair with a delicacy that he knew well. A gesture that Alisa only did when she wanted to impress. They approached the reception desk. He touched her shoulder, in a subtle but intimate way. Daniel stood up, his heart beating wildly. He walked toward them, not knowing what he was going to say. Alisa saw him first, and her face lost its color. She tried to smile, but the tension in her eyes betrayed her. The boss only greeted him with a slight nod, as if nothing was out of the ordinary. Daniel didn't shout, didn't make a fuss. He just looked at her and said in a firm, calm voice, "You decide what's best for you. I'll send the divorce letter to your home." Alisa opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out. He turned his back and walked away. The next few hours were a blur. Daniel drove aimlessly, parked in front of the sea and stayed there until the sky grew dark. The images repeated themselves in his mind like a movie on a loop. Her laughter. The presence of the other man. The betrayal assumed by silence, by omission, by cowardice. He didn't need anything else. That scene was enough. Trust, once destroyed, cannot be rebuilt with apologies. This was not just a physical betrayal. It was the breaking of a pact, the end of the dignity of a story built with patience and love. When he returned home, Alisa was not there. He grabbed a suitcase, put some clothes and documents in it and left. He left his cell phone on the table and went to a hotel. In the following days, he formalized everything with a lawyer. He filed for divorce in a clean way, without arguments, without demands. He just wanted to get rid of that story once and for all. Alisa tried to call. She sent messages. She said she wanted to talk. That it wasn't what he thought. That everything had an explanation. But he didn't answer. There was nothing more to be said. What he didn't know yet, was that there was, in fact, something behind it all. Something bigger, hidden, that Alisa never had the courage to tell. A secret that wasn't just about her. And that, when it came to light, would forever change the way Daniel saw the whole story. And once that secret was revealed, it would be too late to go back. 3 months had passed since the divorce. Daniel had left the apartment where he had lived with Alisa and moved to a smaller house in a quiet, almost hidden neighborhood. He had exchanged the neutral colors for warmer tones, planted a small vegetable garden in the backyard, and given Sinbad the space they had previously lacked. The silence of that new routine was comfortable. It no longer hurt. He had learned to deal with absence, with the empty spaces in his memory, with the long nights and lonely Sundays. If before the sound of Alisa's ghostly laughter had accompanied him through the rooms of the house, now he filled those moments with music, with books, with walks. Little by little, he began to feel like he existed as a man again, not just as part of something that was no longer his. And, surprisingly, he was at peace. It was on one of those calm mornings, after feeding Sinbad and watering the plants, that the intercom rang. The doorman's voice sounded hesitant. He said that a woman insisted on seeing him, that she seemed nervous and distressed. Daniel hesitated for a moment. He hadn't seen Alisa since the separation. She didn't respond to messages, didn't answer calls. She had disappeared, as if she had accepted the end and moved on with her life. But deep down, he knew that it wouldn't end that simply. He took a deep breath, let himself in, and waited. When he opened the door, he saw Alisa standing at the gate, different from how he remembered her. Her hair was down, no makeup, her eyes were puffy, as if she hadn't slept in days. She was pale, but with a sparkle in her eyes that Daniel couldn't decipher. She was no longer the woman who walked down to events in high heels, nor the one who smiled secretly on the phone. She was another. A version without defenses, without a shield. He didn't say anything. He just opened the gate and stepped aside to let her in. She walked to the porch and stopped there, as if she needed that time to organize what she was going to say. Alisa began by saying that she knew she had no right to be there, that he had every reason in the world not to want to see her, but that she needed to tell him something she couldn't handle on her own. She said it wasn't an excuse, nor an attempt to win him back, that she didn't expect forgiveness. She just needed to talk. Daniel remained silent. He looked at her as if he no longer felt anger, only distance. A kind of cold serenity, where the disappointment had already been absorbed. Then she began. She said that, weeks before the separation, she had received unexpected news. She found out she was pregnant. He said he had a breakdown, that he didn't know how to deal with it. That his feelings were confusing, because at that moment her life was already unbalanced, shattered inside. She said she thought about telling him, but didn't have the courage, that she thought he wouldn't believe her, or worse, that he would believe her and feel obligated to get back together because of the baby. That she preferred to keep it to herself until she understood what she wanted to do. Daniel kept his face still. But his eyes were trembling. Alisa continued, saying that she had taken the tests, confirmed the pregnancy and that, in a mix of guilt and desperation, she told everything to her boss, who also found out about the betrayal and left her without giving her any answer. She said that he was shocked, but did not question her, did not welcome her, and that days later he transferred her to another department, as if he needed to erase her from his life. Alone, Alisa decided that she would raise the child, that she would face the consequences of the choices she had made. But she did not expect that, at the end of the second month, her body would reject the pregnancy. She suffered a miscarriage. And she was rushed to the hospital one rainy morning, without being able to tell anyone. She said that she thought about calling Daniel, but imagined that he would not answer. That she had already caused too much pain. When she finished, the silence became heavier than before. Daniel looked at her, but his eyes were elsewhere. The image she described was too surreal to fit with the woman he had met. Pregnant. Alone. Lost in a world she had built herself. For a few seconds, everything seemed to stop. The wind rustling the leaves in the garden, the sound of cars passing by outside, even Sinbad's distant barking. Everything was in suspense, as if the universe was also waiting for his reaction. He took a deep breath. He walked over to the balcony and sat down in the armchair opposite her. He looked at Alisa for a long time, until he finally spoke. He said he didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal, the secret, or the fact that she had gone through all of this without trusting him. He said that, no matter how painful it had been, he would still have stayed by her side. That he would have held her hand, that he would have faced the world if necessary. But now everything was empty. He said he felt mourning. Not only for the child that was never born, but for the life they could have built and that she chose to destroy in silence. Alisa cried, but she didn't beg. She just let the tears flow, as if she knew there was no way to get back what was lost. She apologized, but not with memorized words. She spoke of real regret, of the pain of realizing too late the value of what she had lost. She said she hated herself for having broken something so pure and that she wasn't looking for redemption, only peace. She asked him to know the truth, not to change the past, but so he would understand that, despite the mistakes, there was still truth in much of what they had experienced. Daniel stood up, walked to the gate and opened it. He looked at her and said, in a tone of voice that mixed tiredness and acceptance, that some stories end before the end. That, even with love, even with empathy, there are things that time cannot fix. And that he was no longer the man who could share a life with her. She walked towards him with tears in her eyes, touched his hand lightly, but there was no response. He just followed her with his eyes until he saw her turn the corner and disappear. That day, Daniel came back home with a heavy heart, but a light soul. Because, whatever, I had all the pieces of the puzzle. Because the doubt was gone. And, as cruel as the truth had been, it also set him free. The past would not return. But the future, that could still be rewritten. 2 months after that conversation on the porch, Daniel's routine had gained a new lease of life. It wasn't about forgetting, but about learning to live with what was now part of his history, even though he had never asked for it. Alisa's revelation had left its mark, yes, but it had also left a clarity he hadn't had before. It was like walking through a fire and coming out the other side covered in soot, but alive. Life was slowly getting back on its feet, between simple commitments and new possibilities. It was during this time, almost by accident, that he met Clara. She was discreet, soft-spoken, and worked at the small bookstore downtown where he started going on Saturdays. Their first contact was trivial, about an out-of-print book. But the exchanges were repeated, with longer glances and conversations that went beyond the covers and synopses. Clara didn't ask too many questions or pressure him. She was just there, with a calm presence, laughing with her eyes and listening as if everything he said was important. It was different from anything he had ever experienced. She wasn't trying to prove anything, she wasn't trying to fix him. She just saw him. Their meetings became regular. First coffee, then dinner, then walks with Sinbad. Things fell into place with a lightness that Daniel had almost forgotten was possible. And perhaps that was why, when he held her hand for the first time, he felt the world spin in a strangely gentle way. No weight, no past suffocating. Just the now. He began to rebuild, step by step, without big promises, but with small, deep truths. Clara was not the opposite of Alisa, she was just herself. And over time, Daniel realized that he didn't need extremes. He just needed peace. Alisa, on the other hand, had disappeared. After that last conversation, she didn't send any more messages, didn't try to meet up again, didn't send any letters. She disappeared from the map, as if she had finally accepted that her presence no longer had a place in Daniel's life. Until the day when, out of the blue, a phone call interrupted a Sunday afternoon. Daniel was with Clara and Sinbad on a picnic in the park. He answered on impulse, not recognizing the number. The voice on the other end hesitated. It was Alisa's sister. She was distressed, saying that she had disappeared for 3 days, that she hadn't answered calls, that she hadn't come to work, that there was no sign of activity on her social media. Daniel was paralyzed. As much as he didn't want to, restlessness took over. He asked for her new address and went there. The apartment was locked. His sister waited at the door, anxious, her eyes red. Daniel forced the lock with the help of a locksmith who had been called in a hurry. When they entered, the place was dark and messy. Half-empty bottles, dirty dishes, clothes thrown around. A desolate scene. In the bedroom, Alisa was lying down, still breathing. There were pills scattered on the nightstand, but no empty bottles. It seemed more like a cry for help than an end. She slowly opened her eyes and saw Daniel. She tried to sit up, but her body wouldn't respond. He didn't say anything, just called 911 and waited in silence. At the hospital, after being stabilized, Alisa refused visitors. But she allowed one last conversation with Daniel. In the white room, with cold light, the two looked at each other like two strangers with a shared past. She was pale, with empty eyes. She said she could no longer bear the guilt, that she tried to move on, but the memories wouldn't let her sleep. That everywhere she went she had his shadow, his smell, his silence. She said she saw Daniel's face every time she looked in the mirror, not out of longing, but out of regret. That it was no longer about having him back, but about not being able to live with what she had become. Daniel listened to everything calmly. There was no more anger, no more resentment. Only compassion. And, perhaps, a trace of sadness at seeing her in that state. He said he was sorry for everything she had been through, but that life doesn't wait for us to fix ourselves. She said that every choice has an echo, and that hers had screamed too loudly to be ignored. After that afternoon, Daniel did not return to the hospital. He knew there was nothing more he could offer without losing himself again. Alisa was hospitalized for a few more days and, after being discharged, she decided to move to another city. She informed her sister and left without leaving an address. Months passed. Daniel and Clara moved forward naturally. They decided to live together in a simple house on the outskirts of the city. The garden flourished with new plants that Clara cared for as if she were caring for the heart of someone she loves. Sinbad grew old gently, always lying next to the sofa where Daniel read at dusk. Everything seemed to take on a new contour, more mature, more serene. It was on a spring morning, when Clara came out of the bathroom with wet hair and a lazy smile, that Daniel received a letter with no return address. The envelope was beige, the handwriting familiar. He opened it carefully, not knowing if he wanted to read it in a suit. But he did. Alisa wrote with firm words, as if she no longer expected a reply. She said that she had started over from scratch, that she was in therapy, that she now worked with children in a social project. She said that she would forever carry the pain of what she had caused, but that she had learned that part of maturing is recognizing that certain wounds do not require healing, only respect. She said that she was not writing to ask for anything, just to thank him. For having been her home, her anchor, even when she herself chose to lose herself. Daniel read it to the end, folded the letter carefully and put it in a memory box that he rarely opened. He looked out the window and saw Clara hanging clothes on the clothesline, her hair blowing in the wind, her expression serene. He went over to her, hugged her from behind and whispered something that she didn't understand right away. But she smiled. Because she understood what was not said. A few weeks later, Daniel was invited to give a talk about human relationships at a symposium. He told his story without names or dates, just with feelings. He spoke about the weight of silence, about the value of truth, about how love is also the ability to rebuild after chaos. At the end, he was applauded for minutes. People approached him, thanked him, moved. Daniel left that auditorium with the certainty that his pain had not been in vain. It had transformed into something greater, something that touched other lives. That night, Clara prepared a special dinner. Candles on the table, red wine, and soft music. When Daniel entered the room, her eyes were shining. She said she had a surprise for him. She handed him a small box. Inside were a pair of baby shoes and a positive test result. He stood still for a few seconds, his heart racing, his eyes filling with tears. Then he hugged her tightly, as if he could protect her from the whole world. A new beginning. A fresh start without lies, without shadows, only light. As they danced slowly in the middle of the room, Clara asked if he still thought about Alisa. Daniel answered not with words, but with a light kiss on the top of her head. The answer was there. Some stories end as tragedies. Others, as lessons. But the rarest, turn into peace. The world seemed to turn more slowly since that night when Clara revealed her pregnancy. It wasn't just the joy of a new cycle, but the deep awareness that a new role was emerging before Daniel, a role that would demand more than just presence, it would demand dedication, patience and truth. And for the first time in a long time, he felt he had something complete to offer. The days passed like a sequence of gentle scenes, between medical appointments, choosing names and cultivating a silent nest, where expectations were not anxious, but sweet. Clara brought with her a serenity that welcomed the doubts and ghosts that, from time to time, still haunted Daniel in the silent dawns. He learned to love again, not as someone who forgets, but as someone who accepts that the past built the foundations of a more conscious present. Despite the emotional stability he had built alongside Clara, Alisa's letter would not fade from Daniel's memory. Not because of guilt or longing, but because of the paradox hidden there. How could someone capable of causing so much damage, at the same time, demonstrate such a painfully true understanding of his own flaws? And it was precisely at this point that a moral dilemma began to form within him. Not because he wanted to reconnect with what was left behind, but because compassion placed him before a difficult choice, to go on with his life completely ignoring Alisa's fate or to extend some kind of silent help to that woman who, despite everything, had once been the center of his universe. This thought gnawed at him without asking permission, appearing at random moments, like a cold breeze through the window on a hot day. There was a sense of emotional, almost ethical justice that Daniel could not ignore. Clara noticed. She did not ask, but she knew. There was a more distant look sometimes, a pause before answering, a deeper breath before sleeping. And because he loved, he did not pressure. I hoped he would find his answers. It was on a gray afternoon, while organizing some old papers, that Daniel found Alisa's sister's contact information, written on the back of a hardcover diary. His initial instinct was to put it away again and forget about it. But after a few minutes of staring into space, he called. The conversation was brief. The sister told him that Alisa was living in a small village, working as a volunteer at a shelter for vulnerable teenagers. She said that she had found some balance, but that she was still a woman marked by mistakes that she had never forgiven herself for. Daniel thanked her for the information and hung up. He had no intention of visiting or getting in touch, but knowing that she was alive, moving, trying to rebuild, brought him a kind of relief that he didn't know he needed. That same week, a strong storm hit the city. Clara felt ill, and intense cramps at the beginning of her pregnancy led Daniel to rush her to the hospital. The wait in the emergency room was agonizing. The sterile smell, the muffled screams in the hallways, the hurried professionals, everything seemed to contribute to a feeling of chaos and helplessness. When the doctor finally left the room, the minutes froze. She smiled, said that the baby was fine, that this was normal in some pregnancies, and that Clara only needed complete rest for the next few days. Daniel breathed as if he had come back to the surface after nearly drowning. He sat next to her bed and held her hand tightly, promising without words that he would do everything differently, that he would not let the past contaminate what was most pure happening now. The following days were slow. He cared for her with silent dedication, between homemade soups, foot massages and whispered readings at dusk. And there, in that delicate microcosm of protection and love, he realized that what truly defined someone were not the decisions they made in moments of glory, but the choices made on difficult days, in uncomfortable silences, in dilemmas that no one saw. And that was how he understood that he did not need to seek redemption in the past. He just had to live fully in the present. He just had to not run away. Still, the universe seemed to want to test this new version of itself. One ordinary morning, as he was leaving to take documents to the notary's office, Daniel came across a familiar figure sitting under the awning of a coffee shop. The look in his eyes was unmistakable. Alisa. She saw him too, but didn't get up. There was a calm recognition on her face, as if she knew this meeting would happen at some point. He hesitated. He could have just walked on. But he didn't. He walked over to her, excused himself, and sat down in the chair opposite. They didn't say anything for a few seconds. They just looked at each other. It was another woman. Her features were more defined, her body thinner, her eyes calmer. There was a peace there, but also a resigned guilt. She was the first to speak, asking if Clara was okay, if the baby was okay. Daniel responded with a nod and a slight smile. Alisa said she hadn't expected to see him, that she wasn't there for him, but for a conference for the project she was working on. She said that she now worked with teenagers who had lost their family references and that, in some way, she helped them understand that mistakes do not need to define their destinies. Daniel listened attentively. And, in the end, he simply said that he hoped she was happy, even with the burdens she carried. Alisa laughed softly, saying that happiness was too big a word, but that peace was enough. When they said goodbye, neither of them extended their arms. They just smiled lightly, as if they understood that certain stories don't need to be retold to make sense. Daniel continued on his way. He went into the registry office, did what he had to do, and returned home as if he had less of a burden on his shoulders. That day, he prepared a simple dinner for Clara and read aloud the first chapter of a children's book. Sitting on the couch, with Sinbad lying between them, they made plans for the baby's room, discussed colors, furniture, and names. And for the first time, Daniel allowed himself to dream about the future without any images from the past interfering with the scene. The weeks went by and Clara's big belly began to transform every moment. The unexpected kicks, the ultrasound with blurry images that seemed miraculous to them, the shopping at street markets where each piece of clothing was chosen as if it were part of a treasure. Life revolved around a new birth. And yet, there was a maturity in Daniel that made him look at every detail with an open heart, without rushing, without fear of loss, without the need to fix anything, just live. The pain he once felt was now a memory. No longer a wound. Alisa had become an important part of his journey, not as the guilty party or the villain, but as someone who pushed him towards his most complete version. The dilemma that once paralyzed him was now a bridge. A reminder that life takes a heavy toll on ignored truths, but also offers unexpected paths when you choose to look ahead. On the last night before the birth, Clara felt light contractions. They laughed together, nervous, scared and excited. Daniel looked at her with silent admiration, the same admiration that made him fall in love in the beginning, but now with the weight of history behind it. When they finally went to the hospital, he held her hand tightly. The path was different, the love was different, but for the first time he felt whole. And it was exactly this feeling that prepared him, without him knowing it, for an outcome that not even he could have imagined. The dawn began with hurried footsteps in the white corridors of the hospital, and the insistent sound of heartbeats on monitors illuminated with tension that moment when everything seemed about to change. Daniel was never far from Clara. He squeezed her hand firmly and gently at the same time, as if trying to transfer to her a security that he didn't even know he had. She, breathless, with teary eyes and her forehead pressed against his shoulder between contractions, didn't ask for anything, but the way she looked at him said it all. It was him she trusted, it was him she leaned on, and that made his chest tremble in a new, deeper way. That night, Daniel was not just a companion, nor just a father in waiting. He was the foundation on which a new story was built, without noise from the past, without a shadow of anyone other than the two of them. The hours dragged on. Time seemed to play with their perceptions, making minutes seem like eternities and, at the same time, shortening the moments of calm. When they finally heard the baby's high-pitched cry breaking the sterile silence of the room, something inside Daniel collapsed and was reborn in seconds. He cried. He cried like he hadn't cried in years, with restrained sobs and his eyes fixed on that small life, wrapped in fabric and lights. When the nurse placed the child in Clara's arms, she smiled with tired eyes, and the peace of that moment sealed everything they had been building. Daniel approached, touched his son's face for the first time, and the world seemed to fit completely there, in the warmth of that new skin, in the sound of that small breath. It was real. And it was theirs. In the days that followed, the house was filled with the smell of warm milk, whispered laughter, and sleepless nights. But contrary to what many said, Daniel did not feel tired, he felt purpose. Between diapers and feedings, between Clara's tears in the most difficult moments and the eyes that opened to him in the middle of the night, there was absolute meaning in the routine. Sinbad walked more slowly, but remained close by, lying under the crib, attentive like an ancient guardian. And in that organized chaos, life seemed to say, with tenderness, "You survived, now you belong." It was during a random afternoon, while Clara was sleeping with the baby on her chest, that Daniel received the news. A message on his cell phone, from Alisa's sister's number. Short. To the point. She was in an accident. She's in a coma. I thought you should know. His body froze. The world didn't stop, but his heart did. His first reaction was to look at Clara and the baby. The second was to think that maybe it wasn't right to go. The third was to understand that he needed to do this, not for Alisa, but for himself. Because despite everything, he still carried parts of that story inside him. Parts that, even without pain, deserved a dignified ending. The next day, he went to the hospital. The place was modest, in a small town. The reception smelled of strong disinfectant and stale coffee. When he entered the room, he saw Alisa lying there, her hair scattered across the sheets, her skin pale, her body motionless like an enigma. He didn't feel pity. He felt reverence. For everything they had been, for what they had lost, for what they had understood too late. He sat beside the bed, in silence. And after long minutes, he spoke. He said that he had forgiven, yes, but that it had taken time. That he needed to be another man to understand what it meant to let go. That now he had a new life, a woman with eyes for the future and a son who carried everything he had always wanted to be. He said that he wasn't there to save anyone, but to thank them. Because even though she had destroyed what they had, Alisa had forced him to rebuild himself. She was the pain that had pushed his soul to the next level. And that was no small thing. When it was time to leave, he touched her hand. Cold. Inert. But strangely comforting. He whispered that he hoped she would wake up. Not to apologize. Or to fix anything. But to live. With truth. With lightness. With the courage he always had, but perhaps never knew how to use. And then he left, leaving behind a part of himself that he no longer needed to carry. When he returned home, Clara was in the kitchen with the baby in her arms, singing a song he didn't know. She looked at him and didn't ask him anything. She just came closer, hugged him for a few long seconds and said that dinner was almost ready. And in that moment, Daniel understood that some people love us even when they don't understand all our steps. And that is true love. In the following days, there were no more messages. No news of improvement, no new contact. Life went on. With diapers, with plans, with afternoons in the park, with lukewarm coffees and short naps. Daniel started writing. Daily. Short chronicles, reflections, little stories inspired by conversations with Clara and discoveries with his son. He sent the texts to a small publisher in the city, until, one unexpected afternoon, he received a call. They wanted to publish. The book would be about rebirths. About what no one sees when a heart breaks and has to learn to beat on its own again. About how some voids don't need to be filled, just understood. And between revision deadlines and photo shoots with the baby for the book's blurb, Daniel realized that something inside him had changed definitively. Pain was no longer the protagonist. Guilt was not even a supporting character. Now, his life was made up of conscious pauses, mature decisions, and genuine affection. And perhaps this was the true ending to the whole story, not a dramatic forgiveness, not an unexpected return, not divine punishment, but the silent peace of someone who understood that living is also knowing where to look when everything falls apart. The last memory he had of Alisa was a dream. She was walking barefoot down a dirt road, smiling without saying anything, and when she saw him, she would just wave from afar, with clear eyes and a serenity he had never seen in her in life. When he woke up, he felt a weight dissolve in his chest. And then he went to the crib, picked up his son in his arms, looked out the window and whispered that he was ready for whatever came his way. Because now, finally, he was whole. Months after the birth of his son, Daniel was surprised by a registered letter left in his mailbox, accompanied by a smaller envelope. It was from the hospital where Alisa had been admitted. The sealed envelope contained a final message. The official letter informed that she had died 2 weeks earlier, without regaining consciousness. Respiratory complications had added to her irreversible neurological condition. Alisa passed away silently, without witnesses, without much warning. She had left a signed authorization weeks before the accident, asking that, in case anything happened, her last letter be delivered to Daniel, and only to him. He read the news while standing still, as if the ground had disappeared for a few seconds, even though he had already prepared himself for it. The envelope in his hands felt heavier than any memory. He sat down in his office, locked the door, took a deep breath, and then opened it. In her letter, Alisa did not ask for forgiveness or try to reopen wounds. Instead, she thanked him for everything they had once experienced, for the silly laughs on the couch, for the sleepless nights sharing plans, for the forgotten birthdays that ended up becoming funny stories. She said she knew she had ruined everything that was beautiful between them, but that in the last few months, in every job she did with abandoned teenagers, she found echoes of what she had once destroyed. She said she saw in the eyes of those young people the same emptiness that she had left in him. And that, for the first time, she understood what absence was. Not the physical kind, but the absence of soul, of trust, of truth. At the end of the letter, she wrote that she hoped that their son, even though he had not been born, had left something good in Daniel. Maybe a spark, courage, strength. She asked him to take good care of the boy who was now part of his new life, and that whenever he looked into his eyes, he would no longer see the past, but rather everything that could still be built. And he ended with a short sentence that went through Daniel like a cold breath: "Even if you never forgive me, thank you for being the only true home I've ever had." He folded the paper carefully, put it in the box where he kept everything that had left a deep impression on him, and closed it. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just felt. It was a silent mourning, different from all the others. It was the definitive end of a story that had ended a long time ago, but that was now irreversibly sealed. For the first time, the past was no longer a burden, but a memory, a story that no longer required explanations. He took a deep breath and went downstairs. Clara was waiting for him in the kitchen, cutting fruit for a snack. He hugged her from behind, tightly, tenderly, with complete love. She understood. She didn't ask anything. She just hugged back, like someone who welcomes without needing words. Time passed. Daniel's book became a quiet success, the kind that doesn't explode off the shelves, but remains on the shelves of those who need it most. He was invited to speak at schools, community centers, and lectures on emotional reconstruction, and he always began his speeches with the same phrase: "Pain is not the end of the line. Sometimes, it's just the beginning of a road that you haven't learned how to walk yet." His son grew up surrounded by love, laughter, and sincere words. He was curious, sweet, full of questions and an attentive gaze. Clara, with her unwavering sweetness, was the emotional center of that home. She never tried to occupy spaces that weren't hers, but over time, she became everything Daniel never imagined he would find again: a light, mature, faithful love. One Sunday morning, Daniel took his son to a park where they used to play together. He sat on a bench, watching his son run among the dry leaves, and there he felt a gratitude that hurt. Not for the clean path, but for the scars. For having survived a pain that could have destroyed him. For having transformed loss into learning, and love into a new beginning. And there, on that common bench, with the sun filtering through the trees, he understood that even the darkest paths, if crossed with truth, can lead us back to the light. Alisa was buried in a small cemetery in the countryside, without public tributes, without too many flowers, just with her sister's discreet crying and the silent presence of two teenagers who, according to her, had been her protégés at the shelter. One of them left a paper flower on the grave and whispered, "She taught me not to repeat the mistakes she made." Perhaps this was Alisa's last legacy, not her regret, but the lesson she left behind on the paths she followed after her fall. Alisa's boss, the one who once removed her from the dinner table as if he were taking possession of something, was sued years later for moral harassment and dismissed from the company. He revealed himself to be a controlling man who repeated patterns with several employees. His public image was destroyed and, ironically, he tried to reconnect with Alisa months before the accident, seeking legal support. She did not respond. For the first time, she chose not to bow down. It was the most powerful act of her life. And perhaps, in that gesture, the cycle of submission that began that night in the restaurant ended. Now the story was complete. Each one went their own way, some in peace, others paying the price for their choices. And Daniel, contrary to what he once thought, did not end up alone or empty. He ended up more full of himself. With a love that did not come from urgency, but from maturity. With a home that was not built on promises, but on daily trials. And with a son who, even without knowing it, taught him every day that true love is not the one that promises eternity, but the one that reinvents itself in the face of pain. If you've made it this far, now I want to know, what did you think of this story? Do you believe that, even after the deepest pain, it's still possible to start over? Comment below, I want to know your opinion. And if this story touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because here you'll find many other stories that show how much love, when betrayed, can leave irreversible scars. This story was created to make us reflect on how betrayal destroys not only a relationship, but the essence of who we are. It erodes trust, breaks up homes, and erases stories that could be eternal. The channel does not support, in any way, any type of betrayal. Here, we tell these stories so that you understand, an act of disloyalty can change the destiny of many lives. And let's be clear, trust is hard to build, easy to break, and often impossible to rebuild. Preserve those who love you. And never betray those who would do anything for you.